What if I told you that your entire reality is nothing more than a reflection of your consciousness, and that by shifting into what Emmet Fox calls God consciousness, you could literally rewire the fabric of your existence right now? As you listen to these words, your mind is creating your tomorrow. Every thought, every belief, every mental pattern is weaving the tapestry of your future experiences. Fox discovered something extraordinary. When we align our consciousness with divine truth, we don't just change our perspective, we change our world. This isn't wishful thinking or spiritual fantasy. This is the practical science of consciousness transformation that has liberated thousands from limitation and struggle. If you're ready to step into your true power and discover how God consciousness can revolutionize every aspect of your life, then this journey is for you. Please like this video. Leave a comment about what resonates with you most, and subscribe to our channel for more life-transforming content. Let's begin this incredible adventure together. Chapter 1. The Foundation of God Consciousness. In the bustling streets of New York City during the early 20th century, a young Irish immigrant named Emmet Fox discovered something that would revolutionize not just his own life, but the lives of countless others who would come to understand his teachings. Fox wasn't born into privilege or spiritual enlightenment. He was an electrical engineer who stumbled upon what he would later call the most practical discovery of human existence, the power of God consciousness to completely transform reality. But what exactly is God consciousness? And why did Fox consider it the ultimate key to human transformation? To understand this, we must first examine what Fox meant by consciousness itself. Consciousness, according to Fox, is not merely awareness or the ability to think. It is the very substance from which all experience is created. Your consciousness is the invisible architect of your visible world. Every condition in your life, every relationship, every circumstance, every challenge, and every triumph exists as a direct reflection of the dominant patterns in your consciousness. This isn't metaphorical language. Fox insisted this was literal truth. Your outer world is the perfect mirror of your inner world. When you truly grasp this principle, you begin to understand why Fox was so excited about the implications. If consciousness creates experience, then by changing consciousness, we can change experience. And the highest form of consciousness available to human beings is what Fox termed God consciousness. God consciousness represents the recognition and embodiment of our true spiritual nature. It's the state of awareness in which we recognize ourselves not as separate, limited beings struggling against a hostile universe, but as expressions of infinite divine life, wisdom, and love. In God consciousness, we don't petition God for help from a distance. We recognize that the very essence of what God is, we are. We don't seek to connect with divine power. We realize we are divine power in expression. This recognition isn't achieved through intellectual understanding alone, though understanding is important. God consciousness emerges through what Fox called spiritual realization, those moments when truth stops being a concept in our heads and becomes a living reality in our hearts. Fox often used the analogy of electricity to explain this principle. As an electrical engineer, he understood that electricity exists as a constant, invisible force. It doesn't matter whether you believe in electricity or understand how it works. When you flip a switch and complete the circuit, the light comes on. The electricity was always there, waiting to be utilized. Similarly, God consciousness isn't something we need to create or earn. It's the fundamental reality of our being. Always present, always available. The only thing that varies is our recognition and utilization of this truth. When we flip the switch of spiritual understanding and align our thinking with divine truth, the light of transformation comes on in our experience. But here's where Fox's teaching becomes particularly practical and revolutionary. He didn't present God consciousness as some lofty spiritual state reserved for saints and mystics. He taught it as the natural birthright of every human being and the most practical approach to solving any problem or limitation. Consider the typical approach most people take when facing challenges. They focus intensely on the problem itself, analyzing it, fighting against it, trying to manipulate external circumstances to create different outcomes. Fox called this working on the effect rather than addressing the cause. It's like trying to change your reflection in a mirror by working on the mirror itself, rather than changing what you're presenting to the mirror. God consciousness takes the opposite approach. Instead of working on effects, we work on cause. Instead of trying to change conditions, we change consciousness. Instead of fighting problems, we rise above them by lifting our awareness to a higher level of truth. This shift in approach changes everything. When you operate from God consciousness, you're no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You become a conscious creator of circumstances. You're no longer a victim of life. You become the author of life. You're no longer limited by past patterns or current conditions. You become free to create new patterns and new conditions through the power of transformed thinking. Fox discovered that this principle works in every area of human experience, whether dealing with health challenges, financial difficulties, relationship problems, career obstacles, or any other limitation. The same fundamental approach applies. Rise in consciousness, align with divine truth, and watch as outer conditions reorganize themselves to match the new inner reality. But Fox also understood that this process requires more than just positive thinking or mental willpower. True God consciousness involves a deep spiritual realization that goes beyond the surface level of thought. It requires what he called getting a spiritual treatment, a process of systematically aligning our consciousness with the highest truth we can understand about God, ourselves, and the nature of reality. This spiritual treatment isn't a form of prayer where we beg God to change things for us. It's a process of recognizing and claiming the divine truth that already is. We don't pray to God for healing. We recognize that God is perfect health. And since we are expressions of God, perfect health is our true nature. We don't ask God for abundance. We realize that God is infinite supply. And, as expressions of God, abundance is our natural state. The beauty of this approach is that it works regardless of your religious background or theological beliefs. Fox himself drew from Christian mysticism, but his principles have been successfully applied by people of all faiths and even those who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. The key is not adherence to any particular doctrine, but recognition of the universal spiritual principles that govern the relationship between consciousness and experience. One of the most compelling aspects of Fox's teaching is how it explains why some people seem to effortlessly attract success, health, and happiness, while others struggle despite their best efforts. The difference isn't in their actions, their circumstances, or their luck. The difference is in their consciousness. Those who naturally embody God consciousness, whether they call it that or not, automatically attract experiences that match their inner state of divine recognition. They don't struggle against life, they flow with the divine current. They don't worry about lack, they trust in infinite supply. They don't fear failure, they know they are expressions of divine success. On the other hand, those operating from what Fox called human consciousness, the belief in separation from God, limitation, and the power of circumstances over spiritual truth inevitably create experiences that reflect these beliefs. They work harder, but achieve less. They worry more and attract more to worry about. They fight against problems and find themselves fighting more and more problems. The transition from human consciousness to God consciousness isn't always easy, because it requires us to challenge and release many of the beliefs and mental patterns we've held for years. Fox was honest about this. He never promised that spiritual transformation would happen overnight or without effort, but he did promise that the effort would be worth it, and that anyone willing to do the work could achieve the results. The work involves what Fox called changing your mind, not just changing your opinions or decisions, but fundamentally altering the way you think about yourself, God, and the nature of reality. This mental house cleaning can be challenging because it requires us to release familiar patterns, even when those patterns have been limiting us. Fox often compared this process to cleaning out a house that has been accumulating junk for years. At first, the job seems overwhelming. There's so much clutter, and it's been there for so long that it almost seems like part of the house itself. But as you begin to sort through things, discarding what no longer serves you and organizing what truly has value, the house begins to feel lighter, brighter, and more spacious. Similarly, as we begin to clear our consciousness of limiting beliefs, negative expectations, and fearful thoughts, our mental atmosphere becomes lighter, brighter, and more spacious. And since our outer experience reflects our inner atmosphere, life begins to improve in ways that often surprise us. Fox taught that this improvement isn't limited to gradual, incremental change. When consciousness shifts dramatically, experience can shift dramatically. He documented numerous cases of what appeared to be miraculous healing, sudden financial breakthroughs, impossible problem solutions, and radical life transformations that occurred when individuals achieved genuine spiritual realization. These weren't supernatural interventions that suspended natural law. They were demonstrations of higher natural law, the law of consciousness, which Fox considered the fundamental law governing all other laws. When we align with this higher law through God consciousness, we gain access to possibilities that remain invisible and unavailable to human consciousness. This is why Fox was so passionate about sharing these principles. He had discovered something that works, not just sometimes, not just for special people, not just under certain conditions, but always, for anyone willing to understand and apply spiritual truth consistently. The foundation of God consciousness rests on several key recognitions that Fox considered non-negotiable for anyone serious about transformation. First, the recognition that consciousness creates experience. This isn't a theory to be believed, it's a law to be understood and utilized. Every condition in your life exists because of corresponding patterns in your consciousness. Change the patterns, and you change the conditions. Second, the recognition that you are not separate from God. You are not a physical being trying to connect with a distant spiritual reality. You are a spiritual being, temporarily expressing through physical form. God is not somewhere else. God is the very essence of what you are. Third, the recognition that divine power is always available. You don't need to earn it, deserve it, or wait for the right conditions. Divine power is your natural inheritance, available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of past mistakes or current circumstances. Fourth, the recognition that problems are not ultimate reality. They are temporary conditions created by temporary states of consciousness. Since consciousness can be changed, all problems can be dissolved. Fifth, the recognition that you have the power to choose your thoughts, beliefs, and mental reactions. While you cannot always control external circumstances, you always have the power to control your response to circumstances. This power of choice is where your true freedom lies. These recognitions form the bedrock of God consciousness. When they move from intellectual concepts to living realities in your awareness, everything begins to change. Fox promised that this change would be not just significant, but revolutionary. As we continue our exploration of how God consciousness rewires reality, we'll discover exactly how this revolution unfolds. We'll learn specific techniques for shifting consciousness, practical methods for maintaining spiritual awareness in daily life, and real-world applications for every major area of human experience. But first, it's crucial to understand that Fox wasn't promoting escape from the world or from practical responsibilities. God consciousness doesn't make us less effective in handling daily life. It makes us more effective. It doesn't remove us from human experience. It transforms human experience. It doesn't deny the reality of physical existence. It reveals the spiritual foundation that makes physical existence possible. This is practical spirituality at its finest, spirituality that works in the real world, with real people, facing real challenges. Fox discovered that when we approach life's problems from the level of God consciousness, solutions appear that were invisible from the level of human consciousness. Resources become available that seemed impossible to access. Opportunities open that we never could have created through human effort alone. The reason this works so reliably is that God consciousness aligns us with the fundamental creative force of the universe. Instead of working against the grain of reality, we begin working with it. Instead of swimming upstream against the current of life, we discover how to flow with divine purpose and divine timing. This flow state isn't passive resignation or helpless surrender. It's dynamic cooperation with infinite intelligence and infinite power. It's the difference between trying to force a door that's locked and discovering that you've been pushing when you should have been pulling. Once you understand how the mechanism works, what seemed impossible becomes effortless. Fox taught that every human being is destined to make this discovery. The pull toward God consciousness is built into the very nature of what we are. We can resist it, delay it, or ignore it, but we cannot eliminate it. Sooner or later, life will bring us to the point where we realize that human consciousness has limits and that these limits can only be transcended through spiritual realization. The question isn't whether you'll eventually discover God consciousness. The question is whether you'll discover it now, through deliberate choice and conscious effort, or later, through crisis and necessity. Fox strongly advocated for the former approach. Why wait for problems to force you into spiritual growth when you can choose spiritual growth as a pathway to preventing problems? This brings us to one of Fox's most revolutionary insights. God consciousness is not just a solution to problems, it's a prevention of problems. When you consistently maintain spiritual awareness, you find that many of the difficulties that plague human consciousness simply don't arise in your experience. This isn't because you become disconnected from human life, but because you become connected to divine life. And divine life, by its very nature, is harmonious, abundant, healthy, peaceful, and joyful. When your consciousness reflects these divine qualities, your experience naturally reflects them as well. As we move deeper into our exploration of Fox's teachings, you'll discover that this isn't wishful thinking or religious fantasy. It's spiritual science, the systematic understanding and application of the laws that govern the relationship between consciousness and manifestation. These laws are as reliable as the laws of physics, chemistry, or mathematics. They work consistently, predictably, and measurably. The only reason more people haven't discovered this is that most people haven't been taught to think in terms of consciousness as the primary creative force in their lives. Fox changed all that. He made the invisible visible, the complex simple, and the mystical practical. He showed that God consciousness isn't reserved for the spiritually elite. It's the birthright of every human being who's willing to claim it. In the chapters that follow, we'll discover exactly how to claim this birthright and put it to work in every area of life. We'll explore the specific mental and spiritual techniques that Fox developed for shifting consciousness, the daily practices that maintain spiritual awareness, and the practical applications that create tangible results in health, relationships, finances, career, and personal fulfillment. But perhaps most importantly, we'll discover why Fox considered God consciousness not just a personal advantage, but a contribution to the healing and elevation of human consciousness as a whole. When you operate from God consciousness, you don't just transform your own life, you become a positive influence in the lives of everyone you encounter. This is the ultimate promise of Fox's teaching, not just personal transformation, but the transformation of the world through the transformation of individual consciousness. One person at a time, one realization at a time, one demonstration at a time. God consciousness is rewiring the reality of human experience. Are you ready to be part of this transformation? Are you willing to discover what's possible when you stop trying to change the world and start changing your consciousness instead? Are you prepared to find out what life looks like when you stop believing in limitation and start embodying divine truth? If so, then you're ready for the journey that Fox mapped out so clearly, the journey from human consciousness to God consciousness. From limitation to freedom. From struggle to flow. From fear to faith. From surviving to thriving. This journey has been taken by thousands before you, and it will be taken by thousands after you. But right now, in this moment, it's your journey. And like everyone who has ever made this transition successfully, you're about to discover that the power to transform your life has been within you all along. Chapter 2: Understanding the Mind-Reality Connection. The relationship between mind and reality is the central mystery of human existence. And Emmet Fox spent his entire career unraveling this mystery in ways that were both profound and practical. What he discovered challenges everything most people believe about how life works. Yet it explains why life works the way it does with startling clarity. Fox began with a simple observation that most people overlook. Every single thing you experience in your physical reality first existed as something in your mental reality. Before you moved to your current home, you held the idea of moving in your mind. Before you met your spouse, you carried some concept of relationship in your consciousness. Before you started your career, the possibility existed in your thinking. This might seem obvious, but Fox took this observation much deeper. He didn't just notice that thoughts precede actions. He discovered that thoughts create conditions, not just through the actions they inspire, but through the consciousness they generate. To understand this properly, Fox made a crucial distinction between two types of mental activity: thinking and consciousness. Thinking is the surface level of mental activity, the constant stream of thoughts, opinions, reactions, and mental chatter that occupies most people's attention throughout the day. Consciousness is the deeper level, the fundamental beliefs, assumptions, expectations, and mental atmosphere that underlies and gives rise to thinking. Your thoughts come and go, but your consciousness remains relatively stable, and it's consciousness, not thinking, that creates your experience. This is why positive thinking alone often fails to create lasting change. You might think positive thoughts for a while, but if your underlying consciousness remains unchanged, you'll eventually return to creating the same types of experiences you've always created. Fox illustrated this with the analogy of a garden. Your thoughts are like individual seeds you plant, but your consciousness is like the soil. If the soil is fertile and well prepared, even mediocre seeds can grow into beautiful plants. But if the soil is poor, even the finest seeds will struggle to survive. Similarly, if your consciousness is aligned with spiritual truth, even ordinary thoughts can manifest extraordinary results. But if your consciousness is dominated by fear, doubt, and limitation, even your best intentions will struggle to overcome these adverse conditions. This understanding revolutionizes how we approach the mind-reality connection. Instead of trying to monitor and control every individual thought, which is exhausting and usually ineffective, we focus on transforming the consciousness that gives rise to our thoughts. When consciousness changes, thinking changes automatically. But how exactly does consciousness create reality? Fox explained this through what he called the law of consciousness, which he considered the fundamental law governing all manifestation. This law states that consciousness always manifests as experience, always, without exception, with mathematical precision. This doesn't mean that consciousness creates reality in some magical or supernatural way. It means that consciousness creates reality according to natural law, higher natural law, that most people don't understand. Fox often compared it to radio waves. Radio waves exist all around us, carrying different programs. But we can only access the program that matches the frequency to which our radio is tuned. Similarly, all possibilities exist in the field of infinite potential, but we can only access the possibilities that match the frequency of our consciousness. When your consciousness is tuned to health, you access healthy conditions. When it's tuned to abundance, you access abundant conditions. When it's tuned to love, you access loving conditions. When it's tuned to success, you access successful conditions. This isn't wishful thinking, it's how consciousness works. But Fox also understood that most people have their consciousness tuned to static rather than to clear reception of what they actually want. This static consists of limiting beliefs, negative expectations, fearful assumptions, and what Fox called race consciousness, the collective mental atmosphere of limitation and struggle that pervades human thinking. Race consciousness represents the accumulated mental patterns of humanity's belief in separation from God, the reality of evil, the inevitability of suffering, the scarcity of good, and the power of circumstances over spiritual truth. These patterns are so deeply embedded in collective human thinking that most people absorb them unconsciously and then spend their entire lives creating experiences that confirm these limiting beliefs. Fox discovered that breaking free from race consciousness requires what he called conscious, deliberate spiritual work. This isn't something that happens automatically through good intentions or positive attitudes. It requires systematic effort to replace limiting patterns of consciousness with expansive patterns aligned with spiritual truth. The process begins with what Fox called watchfulness, becoming aware of the contents of your consciousness. Most people live their entire lives without ever examining the beliefs, assumptions, and expectations that are creating their experience. They accept whatever thoughts and feelings arise as inevitable, never questioning whether these mental patterns serve them or limit them. Watchfulness involves stepping back from automatic mental reactions and observing them objectively. When you catch yourself thinking thoughts of lack, you don't fight the thoughts or judge yourself for having them. You simply recognize them as mental patterns that are out of alignment with spiritual truth, and you consciously choose to think differently. This conscious choice is where your true power lies. Fox taught that while you cannot control what thoughts initially arise in your mind, you have complete control over which thoughts you accept, dwell upon, and allow to influence your consciousness. This power of mental selection is the key to transforming consciousness and, through consciousness, transforming experience. But Fox also understood that intellectual understanding alone isn't sufficient to create lasting change in consciousness. Transformation requires what he called spiritual realization, moments when truth stops being a concept in your head and becomes a living reality in your heart. Spiritual realization occurs when you move beyond believing something to knowing something. When you believe in God's love, you hold it as an opinion that might or might not be true. When you realize God's love, you experience it as an undeniable fact of existence. This shift from belief to realization creates a fundamental change in consciousness that automatically manifests as improved conditions. Fox taught several methods for cultivating spiritual realization, but all of them involve what he called treatment, the process of systematically aligning your consciousness with the highest truth you can understand about God, yourself, and the nature of reality. A spiritual treatment isn't a form of petition or request. You're not asking God to change things for you. Instead, you're recognizing the divine truth that already exists and aligning your consciousness with that truth. You're not trying to create good in your life. You're recognizing the good that is already present but may be obscured by limited consciousness. For example, if you're dealing with a health challenge, you don't treat by asking God to heal you. You treat by recognizing that God is perfect health, that you are an expression of God, and that therefore perfect health is your true nature. Any appearance of illness is not ultimate reality. It's a temporary condition created by temporary patterns of consciousness. As you align your consciousness with the truth of perfect health, the outer conditions begin to adjust themselves to match this inner reality. This process works because consciousness and experience are two sides of the same coin. They're not separate things that sometimes influence each other. They're one thing appearing as two. Change consciousness, and experience must change. This is law, not luck. Fox emphasized that this law works regardless of whether you understand it, believe in it, or approve of it. If your consciousness is dominated by fear, you'll create fearful experiences. If it's dominated by love, you'll create loving experiences. If it's dominated by lack, you'll create scarce experiences. If it's dominated by abundance, you'll create prosperous experiences. The law doesn't make exceptions based on your personality, your past, your circumstances, or your worthiness. It simply operates consistently, matching consciousness with corresponding experience. This understanding explains why some people seem to attract success effortlessly, while others struggle despite their best efforts. It's not about luck, connections, talent, or circumstances. It's about consciousness. Those who naturally maintain consciousness aligned with success create successful experiences. Those who maintain consciousness aligned with struggle create struggling experiences. The good news is that consciousness can be changed. No matter how long you've been creating unwanted experiences, no matter how deeply embedded your limiting patterns might be, consciousness is always subject to conscious direction. This is your freedom, your power, and your hope. But Fox also warned against expecting instant results. While consciousness can change quickly through sudden spiritual realization, more often it changes gradually through consistent spiritual work. And even after consciousness begins to shift, it may take time for outer conditions to reorganize themselves to match the new inner reality. This time lag occurs because physical manifestation operates according to different laws than mental manifestation. A thought can change instantly, but physical conditions often require time to adjust. Fox compared this to steering a large ship. When you turn the wheel, the ship doesn't change direction immediately. It takes time for the new heading to manifest in the ship's actual course. But if you maintain the new heading consistently, the ship will eventually follow. Similarly, when you change your consciousness, your life doesn't transform overnight. But if you maintain the new consciousness consistently, your experience will eventually reflect the change. Fox taught that this delay is actually a blessing, because it prevents every random thought or temporary emotional state from immediately manifesting as experience. The key is persistence. Most people give up too soon. They work on changing their consciousness for a few days or weeks, and when they don't see immediate results, they conclude that this stuff doesn't work. But Fox understood that consciousness is like a garden. You plant seeds, water them consistently, and trust that growth is occurring even when you can't see it. Eventually, if you maintain proper conditions, the seeds must sprout and grow. In consciousness work, the proper conditions include several elements that Fox considered essential. First, regular spiritual practice. Just as physical fitness requires regular exercise, spiritual fitness requires regular practice. This might include prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, or treatment work. The specific form matters less than the consistency. Second, mental discipline. This means taking responsibility for the contents of your consciousness by refusing to dwell on thoughts that don't serve you and deliberately choosing thoughts that align with your highest understanding of truth. Third, spiritual study. Fox believed that understanding deepens realization. The more you understand about how consciousness works and why spiritual principles are reliable, the easier it becomes to maintain faith during the time lag between shifting consciousness and seeing results. Fourth, fellowship with like-minded people. Fox understood that consciousness is contagious. When you spend time with people who embody higher consciousness, their mental atmosphere lifts yours. When you spend time with people trapped in limited consciousness, their mental atmosphere can drag yours down. Fifth, service to others. Fox taught that consciousness expands through expression. When you use spiritual principles to help others, you deepen your own understanding and strengthen your own realization. These elements work together to create what Fox called spiritual momentum, a state where maintaining elevated consciousness becomes easier and more natural over time. In the beginning, it requires considerable effort to think spiritually instead of humanly. But as spiritual momentum builds, spiritual thinking becomes automatic, and human thinking becomes the exception rather than the rule. This is when the mind-reality connection becomes unmistakably clear. As consciousness stabilizes at higher levels, experience consistently reflects these higher levels. What once seemed like coincidence or luck reveals itself as the predictable operation of spiritual law. Fox documented countless examples of this phenomenon in his own life and in the lives of his students. People who consistently applied spiritual principles to their consciousness found that their health improved, their relationships became more harmonious, their financial situation stabilized and expanded, their careers flourished, and their overall life experience became increasingly satisfying and fulfilling. But perhaps most remarkably, they also found that external circumstances that had once seemed completely beyond their control began to align with their highest good. Job opportunities appeared at exactly the right time. Health challenges resolved without medical intervention. Financial needs were met through unexpected channels. Relationship conflicts dissolved without confrontation. Problems that had persisted for years suddenly found solutions. Fox insisted that none of this was supernatural or miraculous in the traditional sense. It was simply the natural result of aligning consciousness with spiritual truth. When consciousness operates according to spiritual law, experience manifests according to spiritual law. And spiritual law is inherently harmonious, abundant, healthy, peaceful, and joyful. This doesn't mean that people operating from God consciousness never face challenges or never experience difficulties. It means that they face challenges from a completely different level of consciousness, which gives them access to solutions that are invisible to human consciousness. They don't escape human experience. They transform human experience. The mind-reality connection, as Fox understood it, is not a theory to be believed, but a law to be utilized. Like all natural laws, it works impersonally and consistently. It doesn't care about your past mistakes, current circumstances, or personal worthiness. It simply responds to the consciousness you maintain. This puts tremendous power in your hands. but it also places tremendous responsibility on your shoulders. If consciousness creates experience, then you are creating your experience. Not consciously, perhaps, and not intentionally, but inevitably. The consciousness you maintain is constantly broadcasting itself into manifestation. Fox taught that accepting this responsibility is the beginning of freedom. As long as you believe that circumstances, other people, luck, fate, or anything outside yourself determines your experience, you remain powerless to change your experience. But when you realize that your consciousness is the determining factor, you reclaim your power to create the life you truly want. This realization can be both liberating and overwhelming. On one hand, it means that no matter what your current circumstances look like, you have the power to change them by changing your consciousness. On the other hand, it means that you can no longer blame your problems on anything outside yourself. Fox addressed this challenge by emphasizing that you're not responsible for the unconscious patterns that created your past experiences. Most limiting consciousness is inherited from family patterns, cultural conditioning, and race consciousness. You absorb these patterns innocently, without choosing them deliberately. But once you understand how consciousness works, you become responsible for consciously directing your consciousness going forward. You can't change what you created unconsciously in the past, but you can begin consciously creating what you want in the future. This is where the practical rubber meets the spiritual road. Understanding the mind-reality connection is just the beginning. The real work lies in learning to direct consciousness deliberately and consistently in alignment with your highest vision of what's possible. Fox developed specific techniques for doing this work, which we'll explore in detail in the following chapters. But before we move on to techniques, it's important to understand that consciousness work is not about manipulating reality to get what you want. It's about aligning with divine truth and allowing that truth to manifest naturally in your experience. The difference is crucial. Manipulation comes from ego consciousness and often creates more problems than it solves. Alignment comes from God consciousness and always creates harmony, even when the results don't match your initial expectations. This is why Fox emphasized that true consciousness work always includes surrender to divine will. You don't use spiritual principles to force your personal will upon the universe. You use spiritual principles to align your personal will with divine will, trusting that divine will always knows what's truly best for you. This surrender doesn't make you passive or weak. It makes you receptive to possibilities that are far greater than anything your human mind could conceive or your human effort could achieve. It opens you to what Fox called divine right action, the perfect unfolding of divine purpose through your individual experience. When you combine understanding of the mind-reality connection with surrender to divine will, something magical begins to happen. Your consciousness naturally aligns with the highest good for yourself and everyone concerned. Your experience begins to reflect this alignment in ways that often surprise and delight you. And you discover that cooperation with spiritual law is infinitely more productive than resistance to it. This discovery marks the beginning of what Fox called the life more abundant, not just improvement in circumstances, but transformation of your entire experience of being human. This is where we're headed in our exploration of how God consciousness rewires reality. Chapter 3. The Power of Spiritual Treatment. In the heart of Emmet Fox's revolutionary approach to transforming consciousness lies what he considered the most practical spiritual technique ever developed: spiritual treatment. This isn't prayer as most people understand it, nor is it meditation in the traditional sense. It's a precise, scientific method for aligning consciousness with divine truth in ways that produce measurable results in the physical world. Fox discovered spiritual treatment during his own struggles as a young man. Despite his engineering training and logical mind, he found himself facing problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. health challenges that doctors couldn't cure, financial difficulties that hard work couldn't resolve, relationship conflicts that communication couldn't heal. It was during this period of frustration that he encountered the writings of early New Thought pioneers and began experimenting with what would become his signature approach to consciousness transformation. The breakthrough came when Fox realized that most people approach problems backward. They focus on the problem itself, analyzing it, fighting against it, trying to manipulate circumstances to create different outcomes. But Fox discovered that problems exist at the level of effect, not cause. And the only way to permanently resolve any problem is to address it at the level of cause, which is always consciousness. Spiritual treatment works by systematically replacing the consciousness that created a problem with consciousness that creates solution. It's not about asking God to fix things for you. It's about recognizing the divine truth that already exists and aligning your awareness with that truth so completely that it becomes your living reality. To understand how this works, Fox used the analogy of mathematics. If you're working on an arithmetic problem and getting the wrong answer, you don't petition the numbers to change. You don't fight against the incorrect result. You simply identify where your thinking went off track and correct the error. Once your thinking is corrected, the right answer appears automatically. Similarly, when you're experiencing unwanted conditions in your life, you don't fight against the conditions. You identify the error in consciousness that created those conditions and correct it through spiritual treatment. Once your consciousness is aligned with truth, right conditions appear automatically. But spiritual treatment is much more than positive thinking or affirmation. It's a comprehensive process that Fox broke down into 5 distinct stages, each serving a specific purpose in the transformation of consciousness. The first stage is recognition. This involves recognizing the absolute truth about God as infinite good, perfect love, unlimited power, and pure intelligence. You don't begin treatment by thinking about your problem. You begin by establishing your consciousness in the recognition of divine perfection. This is crucial because it sets the mental atmosphere for everything that follows. During this stage, you might say something like, "There is one power in the universe, and that power is God. God is perfect life, perfect love, perfect wisdom, and perfect action. God is all-present, all-knowing, and all-powerful. Nothing exists outside of God, and nothing can oppose or limit God's perfect expression." The purpose of recognition is to lift your consciousness above the level where problems seem real and into the level where divine truth is the only reality. You're not trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. You're reminding yourself of what you know to be ultimately true, even if it's temporarily obscured by appearances. The second stage is unification. Having recognized the truth about God, you now recognize the truth about yourself in relationship to God. This is where you acknowledge that you are not separate from divine life, but an individual expression of it. You're not a human being trying to connect with God. You're a divine being temporarily expressing through human form. In this stage, you might declare, "I am one with this perfect life, love, wisdom, and power. I am not separate from God. I am an expression of God. God's nature is my nature. God's qualities are my qualities. Where God is, I am. What God is, I am. I am a perfect idea in divine mind, and I express divine perfection in every aspect of my being." Unification is essential because it establishes the foundation for all healing. If you see yourself as separate from divine good, you'll always be trying to get something from outside yourself. But when you realize that divine good is your very nature, you understand that healing doesn't come to you. Healing comes through you as you recognize and express what you already are. The third stage is denial. This involves systematically denying the reality and power of anything that contradicts divine truth. You don't deny that problems appear to exist. You deny that these appearances represent ultimate reality. You deny that they have any real power over you. You deny that they can continue to exist once divine truth is fully realized in your consciousness. Fox was careful to explain that metaphysical denial is not the same as psychological denial. Psychological denial means refusing to acknowledge facts or pretending that problems don't exist. Metaphysical denial means recognizing that what appear to be facts are actually temporary conditions created by temporary states of consciousness, and that these conditions have no ultimate reality or permanent power. During the denial stage, you might say, "This appearance of lack has no reality in divine truth. There is no lack in God. And since God is all there is, there can be no real lack anywhere. This appearance of illness has no power over me because perfect health is my divine nature. This appearance of limitation cannot continue because I am an unlimited expression of infinite life. I deny the reality, the power, and the permanence of anything that contradicts the truth of my divine nature." The fourth stage is affirmation. Having denied the reality of the problem, you now affirm the reality of the solution. But this isn't wishful thinking or trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. It's recognizing and claiming the divine truth that was always present, but may have been obscured by limited consciousness. In this stage, you declare, "Divine health is my true nature, and it is now manifesting perfectly in my body. Divine abundance is my natural inheritance, and it is now flowing freely through every area of my life. Divine love is expressing through all my relationships, creating harmony, understanding, and joy. Divine wisdom guides all my decisions, leading me to right action at the right time. I am living the truth of my divine nature now." The key to effective affirmation is feeling the truth of what you're declaring. You're not trying to create something that doesn't exist. You're recognizing something that already exists and allowing it to manifest in your experience. The feeling of truth is what Fox called realization. And it's this realization that creates the actual transformation in consciousness. The fifth and final stage is gratitude. You conclude your treatment by giving thanks for the divine truth that you've recognized and claimed. This gratitude isn't for something you hope will happen in the future. It's for the divine reality that exists now, regardless of appearances. You might say, "I give thanks for the perfect manifestation of divine truth in my experience. I am grateful for divine life, divine love, divine wisdom, and divine abundance expressing through me now. I give thanks that this treatment has been heard and answered in divine mind, and I release it with complete faith in perfect divine right action." Fox emphasized that gratitude is not optional, it's essential. Gratitude demonstrates faith, and faith is what allows divine truth to manifest in physical experience. When you can be genuinely grateful for divine perfection before you see it in your circumstances, you've achieved the level of consciousness that makes physical demonstration inevitable. These 5 stages, recognition, unification, denial, affirmation, and gratitude, form what Fox called the perfect treatment. But he also understood that effective treatment requires more than just speaking the right words. It requires what he called getting the realization, that moment when divine truth stops being a concept in your mind and becomes a living reality in your consciousness. Getting the realization is like solving a puzzle. You can work on it intellectually, trying different approaches and combinations, but then suddenly, everything clicks into place, and you see the solution clearly. In that moment of clarity, you know that you know. There's no doubt. No uncertainty. No need for further proof. The truth has become self-evident. Similarly, during spiritual treatment, you work systematically through the 5 stages, aligning your consciousness with divine truth. But then, at some point, often, when you least expect it, the realization dawns. You don't just think that divine perfection is your true nature, you know it. You don't just hope that your problem will be solved. You know that in divine truth, there never was a real problem to begin with. This moment of realization is what Fox called the spiritual click. It's the point at which treatment stops being mental work and becomes spiritual fact. And it's this spiritual fact that manifests as improved conditions in your physical experience. Fox taught that anyone can learn to achieve reliable realizations through consistent practice, like any skill. Treatment becomes easier and more effective the more you do it. Beginning students might work for hours to achieve a single clear realization, while experienced practitioners can often shift consciousness dramatically in just a few minutes. But Fox also warned against several common mistakes that can undermine the effectiveness of treatment. The first mistake is treating from the problem instead of treating from the truth. Many people begin treatment by focusing on what's wrong, then trying to affirm what's right, but this keeps consciousness anchored at the level of the problem. Effective treatment begins and remains at the level of divine truth. The second mistake is treating for specific outcomes instead of treating for divine right action. When you demand that divine truth manifest in exactly the way you think it should, you limit infinite intelligence to your finite understanding. It's far more effective to treat for the perfect outworking of divine will. Trusting that infinite intelligence knows better than human intelligence what form the solution should take. The third mistake is treating with effort and strain instead of treating with ease and naturalness. Spiritual truth doesn't require force to manifest. It only requires recognition. When you find yourself struggling during treatment, you've usually slipped back into human consciousness. The solution is to relax. Return to the recognition of divine truth, and allow realization to dawn naturally. The fourth mistake is treating for others without their permission or against their will. Fox taught that you can always hold the truth about others, seeing them as divine expressions regardless of appearances. But you cannot and should not try to force spiritual realization on anyone who isn't receptive to it. Effective treatment for others requires either their consent or limiting yourself to holding the highest vision of their divine nature. The fifth mistake is measuring the effectiveness of treatment by immediate physical results. While dramatic healings do occur, Fox taught that the real test of treatment is whether your consciousness has shifted. If you've achieved genuine realization during treatment, physical results are inevitable, even if they take time to appear. Beyond these 5 stages of formal treatment, Fox also taught what he called treatment in daily life. This involves maintaining consciousness aligned with divine truth throughout your regular activities, rather than limiting spiritual work to formal prayer periods. Treatment in daily life means refusing to accept appearances of limitation as ultimate reality. When someone speaks negatively, you silently hold the truth about their divine nature. When circumstances seem challenging, you remind yourself that divine intelligence is working out perfect solutions. When you're tempted to worry, you return to the recognition that you are surrounded and supported by infinite love. This continuous treatment mindset transforms everyday life into spiritual practice. Instead of seeing spiritual work as something you do at specific times, you begin to see it as your natural way of thinking and being. Your consciousness gradually becomes so aligned with divine truth that maintaining higher awareness requires no special effort. Fox considered this state of continuous treatment consciousness to be the ultimate goal of spiritual development. When you no longer need to work to align with divine truth because alignment has become your natural state, you've achieved what he called spiritual maturity. But even spiritually mature individuals continue to give formal treatments because treatment isn't just about solving problems. It's also about spiritual communion direct. Conscious contact with divine truth that nourishes the soul and deepens understanding. Fox compared treatment to tuning a musical instrument. Even the finest violin requires regular tuning to maintain perfect pitch. Similarly, even the most developed consciousness benefits from regular treatment to maintain perfect alignment with divine truth. The difference is that advanced practitioners use treatment primarily for communion and inspiration rather than for problem solving. This brings us to one of Fox's most important insights about spiritual treatment. Its power increases exponentially with practice. But only if the practice is based on understanding rather than mere repetition. Many people make the mistake of treating treatment like a magic formula. They memorize the words and repeat them mechanically, expecting results based on the repetition itself. But Fox taught that the words of treatment are only vehicles for consciousness. It's the consciousness behind the words that creates the results. This is why Fox emphasized the importance of spiritual study alongside spiritual practice. The more deeply you understand the principles underlying treatment, the more effectively you can apply those principles. Understanding why treatment works makes it much easier to achieve the realization that makes treatment effective. Fox also taught that treatment becomes more powerful when it's based on love rather than need. When you treat because you're desperate for change, your consciousness remains focused on the problem you're trying to escape. But when you treat because you love divine truth and want to express it more fully, your consciousness naturally aligns with solution. This shift from need-based treatment to love-based treatment marks a major milestone in spiritual development. It's the difference between using spiritual principles to get what you want and using spiritual principles to express what you are. The former approach sometimes works. The latter approach always works. Love-based treatment also eliminates the anxiety that often accompanies spiritual practice. When you're treating from need, you constantly worry about whether you're doing it right, whether it's working, whether results will come quickly enough. But when you're treating from love, the treatment itself becomes its own reward. You're not focused on getting something. You're focused on giving something, giving recognition to divine truth. This brings us to perhaps the most profound aspect of Fox's teaching about spiritual treatment. Its ultimate purpose is not to get God to do things for us, but to allow God to do things through us. When you truly understand spiritual treatment, you realize that you're not trying to change God's mind about your situation. God's mind never changes because divine truth is eternal and perfect. What changes is your alignment with that truth. What changes is your capacity to recognize and express divine perfection. From this perspective, every problem becomes an invitation to deepen your realization of divine truth. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to discover new levels of spiritual understanding. Every healing becomes a demonstration of the power that was always present, waiting to be recognized and utilized. This is why Fox could say with complete confidence that there is no problem too big for spiritual treatment, and no person too limited to learn and apply these principles. Divine truth is infinitely greater than any human problem, and every human being has the capacity to align with divine truth. The only question is whether you're willing to do the work, not just the work of giving treatments, but the deeper work of transforming consciousness so completely that spiritual truth becomes your natural way of thinking and being. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without effort. But Fox promised that the effort would be worth it because once you master the art of spiritual treatment, you hold the key to transforming any condition, solving any problem, and manifesting any good that's in alignment with divine will. More than that, you become a beneficial presence in the world. Every treatment you give doesn't just affect your own experience, it adds to the collective consciousness of humanity. Every realization you achieve makes it easier for others to achieve similar realizations. Every demonstration you make proves that spiritual law is reliable and available to all. This is the true power of spiritual treatment, as Fox understood it, not just personal transformation, but universal uplift. Through the systematic practice of aligning individual consciousness with divine truth, we contribute to the gradual transformation of human consciousness as a whole. Chapter 4: Transforming Negative Thought Patterns. One of the greatest obstacles to experiencing God consciousness is the persistent presence of what Emmet Fox called negative thought patterns, those recurring mental habits that keep us trapped in experiences of limitation, fear, and struggle. Fox understood that these patterns don't exist because we're bad people or because we lack willpower. They exist because we've been conditioned by years of exposure to what he termed race consciousness, the collective human belief in separation from God, the reality of evil, and the inevitability of suffering. These negative thought patterns operate like mental grooves that have been worn deep through repetition. Just as water naturally flows along the path of least resistance, our minds naturally flow along familiar thought patterns. Even when those patterns create experiences we don't want, breaking free from these patterns requires what Fox called conscious, deliberate mental work, the systematic practice of redirecting thought away from limitation and toward spiritual truth. Fox identified several categories of negative thought patterns that are particularly destructive to spiritual progress. Understanding these patterns is the first step toward transforming them, because you cannot change what you don't recognize. The first category is fear-based thinking. This includes worry about the future, regret about the past, anxiety about current circumstances, and the general expectation that something bad is likely to happen. Fear-based thinking is perhaps the most common and destructive pattern in human consciousness because it directly contradicts the foundational truth that we live in a universe governed by infinite love and perfect intelligence. When your consciousness is dominated by fear, you literally broadcast fear into manifestation. You attract experiences that confirm your fears, not because the universe wants you to suffer, but because consciousness always manifests as corresponding experience. Fear consciousness creates fearful experiences with the same reliability that healthy consciousness creates healthy experiences. Fox taught that fear is never justified from a spiritual perspective because it's based on the false belief that you are separate from divine protection and guidance. When you truly realize your oneness with infinite intelligence and infinite love, fear becomes impossible. You cannot fear when you know that the power that created the universe is the very essence of what you are. The second category is lack consciousness, the belief that there isn't enough good to go around. This manifests as worry about money, concern about scarcity, competition with others for limited resources, and the general feeling that you have to struggle to get your needs met. Lack consciousness is based on the false belief that God's supply is limited or that you might not be worthy of receiving divine abundance. From Fox's perspective, lack consciousness is not only spiritually false, but logically absurd. If God is infinite and you are an expression of God, then you have access to infinite supply. The only thing that can limit your experience of abundance is your belief in limitation. Change the belief, and you change the experience. The third category is victim consciousness, the belief that your well-being depends on circumstances, other people, or forces outside your control. This includes blaming others for your problems, feeling powerless to change your situation, and waiting for external conditions to improve before you can be happy or successful. Victim consciousness is particularly insidious because it seems to be supported by evidence. After all, other people do sometimes behave badly. Circumstances are sometimes challenging, and external conditions do affect our experience. But Fox taught that while these things may be true at the level of appearances, they're never true at the level of spiritual reality. In spiritual truth, you are never a victim because you always have the power to choose your response to any situation. And your response, not the situation itself, determines your experience. When you realize this, you reclaim your power and begin creating experiences based on your choices rather than your circumstances. The fourth category is separation consciousness, the belief that you are isolated, alone, and disconnected from the source of good in your life. This manifests as loneliness, the feeling that you have to handle everything by yourself, and the sense that no one really understands or cares about you. Separation consciousness is the root of all other negative patterns because it denies the fundamental truth of your divine nature. When you realize that you are one with infinite love, loneliness becomes impossible. When you understand that you are guided by infinite intelligence, confusion disappears. When you recognize that you are supported by infinite power, helplessness dissolves. The fifth category is unworthiness consciousness, the belief that you don't deserve good things or that you're fundamentally flawed in some way. This includes guilt about past mistakes, shame about personal characteristics, and the feeling that you need to earn love, success, or happiness through perfect behavior. Fox taught that unworthiness consciousness is not humility, it's spiritual pride in reverse. True humility recognizes that your worth comes from God, not from your personal achievements or failures. When you understand that you are a perfect idea in divine mind, unworthiness becomes impossible. Recognizing these patterns is crucial, but recognition alone doesn't eliminate them. Fox developed specific techniques for transforming negative patterns into positive ones, and these techniques form the practical heart of his approach to consciousness transformation. The first technique is what Fox called mental substitution. This involves consciously replacing negative thoughts with positive ones the moment you become aware of them. It's not about suppressing negative thoughts or pretending they don't exist. It's about choosing not to dwell on them once they arise. Mental substitution requires vigilance, especially in the beginning when negative patterns are still strong. You must catch yourself in the act of negative thinking and immediately substitute a thought that's aligned with spiritual truth. If you catch yourself worrying, you substitute a thought of trust. If you catch yourself feeling lack, you substitute a thought of abundance. If you catch yourself blaming others, you substitute a thought of taking responsibility. The key to effective mental substitution is having positive thoughts ready in advance. Fox recommended memorizing specific statements of truth that you can use whenever negative patterns arise. These might include affirmations like, "God is my infinite supply," "Divine love guides and protects me," "I am one with perfect life," or "Infinite intelligence solves this problem through me." The second technique is what Fox called the building up treatment. This involves systematically flooding your consciousness with thoughts that support the pattern you want to create. Instead of waiting for negative thoughts to arise and then substituting positive ones, you proactively fill your mind with positive thoughts that leave no room for negative ones. A building up treatment might involve spending 10 or 15 minutes each day affirming divine truth about yourself, your life, and your circumstances. You would declare statements like, "I am a perfect expression of divine life. Perfect health flows through every cell of my body. Divine abundance meets every need before the need arises. Love surrounds me, fills me, and expresses through me in all my relationships. Divine intelligence guides every decision and leads me to perfect right action." The purpose of building up treatment is to establish new mental grooves, positive patterns that become as automatic as the old negative patterns used to be. With consistent practice, positive thinking becomes your natural default mode instead of something you have to work to maintain. The third technique is what Fox called scientific prayer or spiritual treatment, applied specifically to thought patterns. This involves giving yourself a formal treatment for the elimination of negative patterns and the establishment of positive ones. You would begin by recognizing that God is perfect peace, infinite love, unlimited wisdom, and boundless joy. You would then recognize that these divine qualities are your true nature. You would deny that negative patterns have any reality or power in divine truth, and you would affirm that your consciousness naturally reflects divine perfection. You would conclude by giving thanks for the perfect establishment of positive patterns in your thinking. The fourth technique is what Fox called the watch, or standing porter at the door of thought. This involves maintaining continuous awareness of the contents of your consciousness throughout the day. Instead of letting thoughts arise randomly and unconsciously, you consciously monitor your mental atmosphere and choose thoughts that support your highest good. Standing porter requires practice because most people have never learned to observe their thoughts objectively. We identify so completely with our thinking that we don't realize we have the power to choose what we think about. But Fox taught that this power of choice is the key to all transformation. The fifth technique is what Fox called right interpretation. This involves consciously choosing to interpret every experience from the perspective of spiritual truth rather than from the perspective of human limitation. When something appears to go wrong, you look for the spiritual lesson or opportunity it contains. When someone behaves badly, you recognize their divine nature beneath their human mistakes. When circumstances seem challenging, you trust that divine intelligence is working out perfect solutions. Right interpretation doesn't mean denying facts or pretending that problems don't exist. It means looking beyond appearances to see the spiritual truth that's always present. This shift in perspective automatically transforms your experience because you're no longer giving power to appearances of limitation. Fox emphasized that transforming negative thought patterns requires patience and persistence. These patterns didn't develop overnight, and they won't disappear overnight. But with consistent effort, they will weaken and eventually be replaced by positive patterns that serve your highest good. He also taught that the process becomes easier over time. In the beginning, it requires considerable effort to catch negative thoughts and substitute positive ones. But as positive patterns become stronger, they begin to maintain themselves automatically. Eventually, positive thinking becomes as natural as negative thinking once was. One of the most important aspects of pattern transformation is understanding why negative patterns exist in the first place. Fox taught that these patterns originally developed as strategies for survival in a world that seemed threatening and unpredictable. Fear helped our ancestors avoid danger. Lack consciousness motivated them to conserve resources. Victim thinking protected them from taking unnecessary risks. But what served us in primitive conditions often limits us in modern circumstances. The same mental patterns that once protected us now prevent us from experiencing the abundance, love, and joy that are our spiritual birthright. Transforming these patterns isn't about becoming weak or naive. It's about evolving to a higher level of consciousness that's appropriate for spiritual beings living in a spiritual universe. Fox also understood that negative patterns are often reinforced by the people around us and the information we consume. If you spend time with people who constantly complain, worry, or speak negatively, their mental atmosphere will influence yours. If you read news that focuses on problems, disasters, and conflicts, your consciousness will absorb these influences. This is why Fox recommended carefully choosing your mental diet, the books you read, the conversations you engage in, the media you consume, and the people you spend time with. Just as a healthy physical diet supports physical well-being, a healthy mental diet supports mental and spiritual well-being. A healthy mental diet includes spiritual literature that uplifts and inspires you, conversations that focus on solutions rather than problems, entertainment that elevates rather than degrades consciousness, and fellowship with people who share your commitment to spiritual growth. Fox was not advocating escape from the world or denial of its problems. He was advocating conscious choice about what influences you allow into your consciousness. You can be aware of world events and human challenges without allowing them to dominate your mental atmosphere. The ultimate goal of transforming negative thought patterns is not just personal happiness, but the development of what Fox called spiritual immunity. This is a state of consciousness so firmly established in spiritual truth that negative influences simply cannot take root. A person with spiritual immunity doesn't need to work constantly to maintain positive thinking because positive thinking has become their natural state. They don't need to avoid negative people or situations because their consciousness is strong enough to transform whatever they encounter. They don't need to fear negative influences because they've become positive influences themselves. This level of spiritual development doesn't happen quickly, but it is achievable through consistent practice of the techniques Fox outlined. Every negative thought you transform, every fear you dissolve through spiritual understanding, every limitation you transcend through conscious choice contributes to building this spiritual immunity. But perhaps most importantly, transforming your own thought patterns contributes to the transformation of collective human consciousness. Every person who breaks free from negative patterns makes it easier for others to break free. Every individual who demonstrates the possibility of positive thinking in a negative world proves that transformation is possible. This is why Fox considered the transformation of thought patterns to be not just personal work, but spiritual service. By healing your own consciousness, you contribute to the healing of the world. By demonstrating the power of spiritual truth in your own life, you make it easier for others to discover that same power. The negative thought patterns that once seemed so solid and permanent reveal themselves to be nothing more than habits of thinking that can be changed through conscious choice and consistent practice. What seemed like permanent limitations become temporary conditions that dissolve in the light of spiritual truth. This is the promise of Fox's approach to pattern transformation: freedom from the mental habits that limit you and the establishment of new habits that serve your highest good. It's the difference between being a victim of your thoughts and being the master of your consciousness. Chapter 5: Healing Through Divine Realization. The subject of healing occupied a central place in Emmet Fox's teaching, not merely as one application of spiritual principles among many, but as the most direct and demonstrable proof that consciousness truly creates experience. Fox witnessed thousands of healings throughout his career, healings that conventional medicine considered impossible, healings that happened instantly or gradually, healings that restored not just physical health but mental peace and spiritual vitality. But Fox's approach to healing was radically different from most religious or metaphysical healing methods. He didn't believe in healing as a special intervention by divine power. He understood healing as the natural result of aligning consciousness with divine truth. From his perspective, illness isn't something that needs to be cured, it's something that needs to be understood correctly. This understanding begins with what Fox considered the most fundamental truth about health and illness. They are both states of consciousness before they become physical conditions. Perfect health is your natural state because it's God's nature, and you are an expression of God. Illness is not your natural state. It's a temporary condition created by temporary misalignment with spiritual truth. Fox often used the analogy of darkness and light to explain this principle. Darkness isn't a substance or force that needs to be fought or removed. It's simply the absence of light. When you bring light into a dark room, the darkness doesn't go anywhere. It was never really there to begin with. It was just a condition created by the absence of light. Similarly, illness isn't a force that invades the body and needs to be fought. It's a condition created by the absence of spiritual realization in consciousness. When you bring the light of divine truth into consciousness, illness doesn't need to be healed. It was never really there to begin with. It was just a temporary condition created by temporary ignorance of spiritual truth. This perspective completely transforms how you approach health challenges. Instead of fighting illness, you recognize divine perfection. Instead of fearing symptoms, you understand them as signals that consciousness needs realignment. Instead of seeing yourself as a sick person trying to get well, you see yourself as a perfect spiritual being temporarily experiencing the effects of limited thinking. Fox taught that this shift in perspective is not just psychologically helpful, it's absolutely essential for permanent healing, as long as you believe that illness is real, permanent, or powerful. Your consciousness remains aligned with illness. But when you recognize that perfect health is your divine nature, your consciousness begins to align with health. The process Fox used for healing through divine realization follows the same 5-step treatment method we explored earlier, but with specific application to health conditions. In the recognition phase, you establish consciousness in the truth about God's nature. You recognize that God is perfect life, unlimited vitality, complete wholeness, and absolute health. There is no imperfection, no limitation, no sickness in divine life. God doesn't experience illness, aging, weakness, or death because these things are completely foreign to divine nature. In the unification phase, you recognize the truth about your relationship to divine life. You are not separate from perfect health trying to achieve it. You are an expression of perfect health temporarily confused about your true nature. God's health is your health. God's vitality is your vitality. God's perfection is your perfection. Where God is, you are. What God is, you are. In the denial phase, you deny the reality and power of the illness. You don't deny that symptoms appear to exist, but you deny that these appearances represent ultimate truth. You deny that illness has any actual power over you. You deny that it can continue to exist once divine truth is fully realized in your consciousness. You might declare, this appearance of illness has no reality in divine truth. There is no sickness in God. And since God is all there can be no real sickness anywhere. This condition has no power over me because perfect health is my divine nature. I deny the reality, the power, and the permanence of anything that contradicts the truth of perfect health. In the affirmation phase, you claim the reality of perfect health. You declare, perfect health is my divine nature. And it is expressing completely right now. Every cell in my body is alive with divine life. Every organ functions according to divine intelligence. Every system operates in perfect harmony. Divine life flows freely through every part of my being, creating perfect health, perfect vitality, and perfect wholeness. In the gratitude phase, you give thanks for the perfect health that is already yours in divine truth. You thank God not for healing you, but for being perfect health itself, and for creating you as an expression of that perfection. But Fox emphasized that effective healing treatment requires more than just speaking these words. It requires achieving what he called the healing consciousness, that state of awareness in which divine perfection becomes more real to you than physical appearances. Getting into healing consciousness often requires what Fox called lifting thought above the level where illness seems possible. This doesn't mean ignoring symptoms or pretending they don't exist. It means rising to a level of spiritual understanding where you recognize that symptoms, however real they may appear, cannot ultimately deny or overcome divine truth. Fox taught several specific techniques for developing healing consciousness. The first technique is perfect model treatment. This involves holding in consciousness a complete picture of perfect health rather than focusing on the specific illness you want to heal. Instead of treating for the healing of a heart condition, you treat for perfect circulation throughout the entire body. Instead of treating for the healing of depression, you treat for perfect mental and emotional harmony. The perfect model technique works because consciousness always tends to manifest whatever it focuses on most consistently. When you focus on illness, even with the intention of healing it, you're still giving your attention to illness. But when you focus on perfect health, your consciousness naturally aligns with health. The second technique is absent treatment, which can be just as effective as treatment for yourself. Fox discovered that consciousness operates beyond the limitations of time and space. The divine truth you recognize about another person is just as real and powerful as the truth you recognize about yourself. When giving absent treatment for someone else's healing, you don't try to force healing upon them or override their free will. Instead, you hold the highest truth about their divine nature, recognizing them as perfect expressions of divine life regardless of what appearances might suggest. The third technique is group treatment, where two or more people join together to recognize divine truth. Fox found that group treatment could be particularly powerful because it combines the spiritual realization of multiple individuals. Where two or three gather together in consciousness of divine truth, healing power is multiplied exponentially. The fourth technique is continuous treatment, which involves maintaining healing consciousness throughout the day rather than limiting it to formal treatment periods. This means consistently refusing to accept appearances of illness as ultimate reality and continuously returning to the recognition of divine perfection. Continuous treatment is especially important during the period between giving a treatment and seeing physical results. Many people give excellent treatments but then undermine them by returning to illness consciousness during their daily activities. The key is maintaining the same level of spiritual realization you achieved during formal treatment. Fox also taught specific principles that govern the healing process and help explain why some healings happen quickly while others take more time. The first principle is that healing happens according to your capacity to realize divine truth, not according to the severity of the condition. Some conditions that appear serious to medical diagnosis yield quickly to spiritual treatment because the person involved has strong spiritual realization. Other conditions that appear minor may persist because the person has difficulty maintaining healing consciousness. The second principle is that healing often happens gradually rather than instantaneously, and this gradual process should be understood as perfect divine action. Just as a seed grows into a plant through natural stages, consciousness transformation often unfolds through natural stages. Each stage represents progress, even if complete demonstration hasn't yet appeared. The third principle is that healing is always mental first, then physical. The actual healing happens the moment spiritual realization is achieved. Physical improvement is the result of healing, not the healing itself. This is why you can be confident that treatment is working even before you see physical changes. The fourth principle is that healing consciousness must be maintained until demonstration is complete. One moment of perfect realization can initiate the healing process, but sustained realization is usually required to complete it. This is why Fox emphasized the importance of consistent daily treatment until desired results manifest. Fox was particularly insistent that healing through divine realization doesn't conflict with medical treatment. He encouraged people to use whatever means were necessary to maintain their comfort and well-being while consciousness transformation was taking place. The goal isn't to prove that medicine is unnecessary, but to prove that consciousness is primary. He did, however, teach that the ultimate solution to any health challenge must come through consciousness, because consciousness is the level at which all problems originate. Medical treatment can provide valuable support, but lasting healing requires addressing the consciousness that created the condition in the first place. One of the most significant aspects of Fox's healing work was his understanding of what he called the healing of the whole person. He recognized that physical healing without corresponding mental and spiritual growth often leads to the recurrence of symptoms or the development of different problems. True healing, according to Fox, involves not just the disappearance of symptoms, but the transformation of the consciousness that made symptoms possible. This transformation typically results in improved health, but it also results in greater peace, increased wisdom, deeper spiritual understanding, and enhanced capacity for joy. This is why Fox considered every healing to be fundamentally a spiritual awakening. The consciousness that can heal the body is the same consciousness that can heal relationships, finances, career challenges, and every other area of life. When you learn to align consciousness with divine truth for healing, you've learned the fundamental principle that can transform your entire experience. Fox documented many cases where people who came for physical healing found that their whole lives improved dramatically. Relationships became more harmonious, financial conditions stabilized, career opportunities appeared, and their general sense of well-being increased far beyond what they had expected. This happens because healing consciousness doesn't just affect the specific area being treated, it elevates the entire mental atmosphere. When consciousness is lifted to the level where physical healing becomes possible, that same elevated consciousness naturally creates improvement in all areas of experience. Fox also taught that engaging in healing work, whether for yourself or others, develops spiritual faculties that extend far beyond healing itself. The spiritual realization required for healing strengthens your capacity for divine communion, deepens your understanding of spiritual truth, and increases your effectiveness in all forms of spiritual work. Many of Fox's most advanced students were people who had originally come to him for physical healing but remained to develop their spiritual understanding. They discovered that learning to heal through divine realization was actually learning to live from God consciousness in every area of life. This brings us to one of Fox's most profound insights about healing. Its ultimate purpose is not just the restoration of health, but the demonstration of divine truth. Every healing proves that spiritual law is more powerful than physical law, that consciousness is more fundamental than matter, and that divine truth is more real than material appearances. These demonstrations don't just benefit the person being healed, they inspire faith in everyone who witnesses them. They prove that the promises of spiritual teaching are not just beautiful theories, but practical realities that can be experienced by anyone willing to understand and apply spiritual principle. Fox considered himself not just a teacher or healer, but a demonstrator of spiritual truth. His goal was not just to help people solve their problems, but to prove that spiritual law works reliably and consistently for anyone who understands how to apply it properly. The healing work became a laboratory for testing and refining his understanding of spiritual principles. Every successful healing confirmed his theoretical understanding. Every challenge or delay provided an opportunity to deepen that understanding. Over time, his approach to healing became increasingly refined and effective. But Fox never lost sight of the fact that he was not the healer. God is the only healer. And God heals through the realization of divine truth in human consciousness. His role was simply to help people understand their own divine nature clearly enough that healing could occur naturally. This understanding kept Fox humble about his healing work while also making him confident about its results. He knew that he couldn't heal anyone, but he also knew that anyone could be healed who was willing to understand their true relationship to divine life. The healings that occurred through Fox's ministry proved that there is no condition too severe for divine truth, no problem too complex for divine Intelligenz, and no person too limited to experience divine healing. They demonstrated that healing is not a miracle that suspends natural law, but the natural result of understanding and applying spiritual law correctly. These demonstrations continue to inspire people decades after Fox's passing because they prove that healing through divine realization is not dependent on any particular person's special powers. They prove that the same principles that worked through Fox can work through anyone who takes the time to understand and apply them consistently. This is perhaps the greatest gift of Fox's healing ministry, not just the physical healings that occurred, but the understanding that healing is possible for everyone who is willing to recognize their divine nature and align their consciousness with spiritual truth. Chapter 6. Manifesting abundance and prosperity. Perhaps no subject generated more controversy during Emmet Fox's time and continues to generate controversy today than his teaching about manifesting abundance and prosperity through spiritual understanding. Critics accused him of promoting materialism disguised as spirituality, while supporters testified to dramatic financial transformations that occurred through applying his principles. Fox addressed these criticisms directly by making a crucial distinction between spiritual prosperity and mere material accumulation. Spiritual prosperity, according to Fox, is not about getting rich for the sake of being rich. It's about understanding your divine nature as an expression of infinite supply and allowing that understanding to manifest naturally in your experience. The foundation of Fox's prosperity teaching rests on what he called the abundance principle, the recognition that the universe operates from infinite supply, not scarcity. This principle stands in direct contradiction to one of the most deeply embedded beliefs in human consciousness, the idea that there isn't enough good to go around. Scarcity consciousness manifests in countless ways: worry about money, competition with others for limited resources, fear of economic uncertainty, guilt about having more than others, and the general feeling that abundance for one person means lack for another. Fox taught that these beliefs, however common they might be, are completely false from a spiritual perspective. If God is infinite and you are an expression of God, then you have access to infinite supply, not because you deserve it more than others, not because you've earned it through good behavior, but because abundance is your natural inheritance as a divine being. Lack is not your natural state. It's a temporary condition created by temporary misalignment with spiritual truth. Fox often used the analogy of radio waves to explain this principle. All radio programs exist simultaneously in the atmosphere around your radio, but you can only receive the program to which your radio is tuned. Similarly, all forms of good, including material abundance, exist simultaneously in the field of infinite possibility, but you can only access the good to which your consciousness is tuned. When your consciousness is tuned to lack, limitation, and struggle, that's what you experience. When your consciousness is tuned to abundance, supply, and prosperity, that's what you experience. The supply itself never changes. Only your access to it changes based on your state of consciousness. This understanding completely transforms how you approach financial challenges. Instead of working harder to make more money, you work smarter to align consciousness with abundance. Instead of competing with others for limited resources, you recognize that everyone can prosper without taking anything away from anyone else. Instead of fearing lack, you trust in infinite supply. But Fox was careful to distinguish between true abundance consciousness and what he called getting consciousness, the desperate desire to acquire things as a way of feeling secure, important, or successful. Getting consciousness is actually a form of lack consciousness because it's based on the belief that you don't already have everything you need. True abundance consciousness recognizes that you are already connected to infinite supply. You don't need to get anything. You need to understand what you already have access to. You don't need to create prosperity. You need to recognize the prosperity that already exists as your divine inheritance. This recognition transforms not just your financial experience, but your entire relationship with the material world. When you understand that abundance is spiritual, not material, you stop trying to manipulate external circumstances and start working on internal consciousness. You stop focusing on how much money you have and start focusing on your understanding of divine supply. Fox taught that this shift in focus is crucial because consciousness always manifests as corresponding experience. When you focus on lack, you create more experiences of lack. When you focus on abundance, you create more experiences of abundance. But abundance consciousness requires more than just thinking positive thoughts about money. It requires a complete transformation in how you understand supply and its source. The practical application of abundance consciousness begins with what Fox called prosperity treatment, the systematic process of aligning your consciousness with the truth of infinite supply. This follows the same 5-step treatment method, but with specific focus on abundance and prosperity. In the recognition phase, you establish consciousness in the truth about God as infinite supply. God is not just abundant, God is abundance itself. There is no lack, no limitation, no scarcity in divine nature. God doesn't experience financial problems, economic uncertainty, or insufficient resources because these things are completely foreign to infinite supply. You might declare, God is infinite supply, unlimited abundance, and perfect prosperity. All wealth comes from God. All resources flow from God. All supply originates in God. There is no lack in divine nature, no limitation in divine substance, no scarcity in divine provision. In the unification phase, you recognize your relationship to divine supply. You are not separate from abundance trying to achieve it. You are an expression of abundance temporarily confused about your true nature. God's supply is your supply. God's abundance is your abundance. God's prosperity is your prosperity. You declare, I am one with infinite supply. God's abundance is my abundance. I am not separate from divine prosperity. I am an expression of divine prosperity. Where God's wealth is, I am. What God's abundance is, I am. I have access to unlimited supply because I am an expression of unlimited supply. In the denial phase, you deny the reality and power of lack. You don't deny that appearances of limitation may exist, but you deny that these appearances represent ultimate truth. You deny that lack has any real power over you. You deny that financial limitation can continue to exist once divine truth is fully realized in your consciousness. This appearance of lack has no reality in divine truth. There is no scarcity in God. And since God is all there is, there can be no real scarcity anywhere. Financial limitation has no power over me because divine abundance is my true nature. I deny the reality, the power, and the permanence of anything that contradicts the truth of infinite supply. In the affirmation phase, you claim the reality of divine abundance. Divine supply meets every need before the need arises. Infinite abundance flows through every area of my life. I am richly and abundantly supplied with everything necessary for my highest good. Money comes to me easily and naturally through divine right action. I am a perfect channel for the expression of divine prosperity. In the gratitude phase, you give thanks for the divine abundance that is already yours in spiritual truth. I give thanks for the perfect manifestation of divine supply in my experience. I am grateful for the abundance that flows through me, the prosperity that surrounds me, and the wealth that is my divine inheritance. I give thanks that my every need is met abundantly and that I have more than enough to share with others. But Fox emphasized that effective prosperity treatment requires achieving what he called abundance consciousness, that state of awareness in which divine supply becomes more real to you than appearances of lack. This consciousness cannot be faked or forced. It must be genuine realization based on spiritual understanding. Fox taught several specific techniques for developing genuine abundance consciousness. The first technique is gratitude practice, systematically acknowledging and appreciating the abundance that already exists in your life. This doesn't mean pretending you have more money than you do, but recognizing the many forms of wealth you already experience: health, relationships, natural beauty, intellectual capacity, spiritual understanding, creative ability, and countless other blessings. Gratitude practice works because consciousness tends to expand whatever it focuses on with appreciation. When you consistently appreciate the abundance you already have, your consciousness naturally aligns with abundance, which attracts more abundant experiences. The second technique is divine right supply meditation, regularly spending time in communion with God as infinite supply. This involves moving beyond thinking about abundance to actually experiencing your connection to unlimited resources. During these meditations, you don't ask for anything. You simply rest in the awareness of already being connected to everything you could possibly need. The third technique is prosperity affirmations, used not as magic formulas, but as tools for training consciousness. Fox recommended specific affirmations like, "God is my supply," "Divine abundance flows freely through me," and "I am richly and abundantly supplied with all good things." The key is not just repeating the words, but feeling the truth they represent. The fourth technique is generous giving based on spiritual understanding rather than religious obligation. When you give from abundance consciousness, you demonstrate your faith in unlimited supply. When you give from lack consciousness, you deplete your sense of supply. Fox taught that giving from the right consciousness actually increases your experience of abundance. The fifth technique is right investment of mental capital, choosing carefully where you place your attention and energy. Just as you wouldn't invest money in ventures you don't believe in, you shouldn't invest mental energy in thoughts and activities that contradict abundance consciousness. Fox also taught specific principles that govern the manifestation of prosperity. The first principle is that supply comes through divine channels, not human channels. This means that your good doesn't depend on any particular job, person, investment, or economic condition. When consciousness is aligned with divine supply, infinite intelligence opens channels that human intelligence couldn't imagine or create. The second principle is that prosperity manifests according to consciousness, not according to effort. Working harder doesn't necessarily create more abundance. Working from abundance consciousness creates more abundance. This doesn't mean that action is unnecessary, but that right action flows naturally from right consciousness. The third principle is that true prosperity is always balanced and harmonious. Wealth that comes through exploitation, deception, or harm to others is not divine prosperity. It's human manipulation that inevitably creates problems. Divine prosperity blesses everyone it touches. The fourth principle is that prosperity includes but transcends money. True abundance encompasses every area of life: health, relationships, creativity, spiritual understanding, and material resources. When consciousness is aligned with divine supply, all areas of life flourish together. Fox addressed several common obstacles to manifesting prosperity. The first obstacle is guilt about wanting material good. Many people believe that spiritual individuals should be indifferent to money or material comfort. Fox taught that this belief is based on the false idea that matter and spirit are separate. In truth, matter is spirit in form, and there's nothing unspiritual about enjoying material expressions of divine good. The second obstacle is fear of not having enough. Ironically, the fear of lack creates experiences of lack by keeping consciousness focused on limitation. The solution is not to ignore financial realities, but to address them from abundance consciousness rather than lack consciousness. The third obstacle is comparison with others. When you measure your prosperity against other people's wealth, you create consciousness of either superiority or inferiority, both of which interfere with genuine abundance consciousness. Your relationship is with divine supply, not with other people's financial conditions. The fourth obstacle is attachment to specific forms of supply. When you demand that abundance come through particular channels or in particular ways, you limit infinite intelligence to your finite understanding. It's more effective to treat for divine right supply and trust that infinite wisdom knows the best way to provide for your needs. The fifth obstacle is inconsistency in applying prosperity principles. Many people practice abundance consciousness when they feel financially secure, but return to lack consciousness when challenges arise. The key is maintaining spiritual understanding regardless of appearances. Fox taught that prosperity consciousness develops gradually for most people. You might begin by applying spiritual principles to small financial challenges and gradually work up to larger ones as your confidence and understanding increase. Each demonstration proves that the principles work and builds faith for larger demonstrations. He also emphasized that true prosperity always includes the capacity to share abundance with others. Divine supply flows through you, not to you. When consciousness is aligned with infinite supply, you naturally become a channel through which abundance flows to others who need it. This understanding prevents prosperity consciousness from becoming selfish or materialistic. You're not trying to accumulate wealth for its own sake. You're trying to become a more effective channel for the distribution of divine good. The more prosperous you become, the more you're able to contribute to the prosperity of others. Fox documented many cases of dramatic financial transformations that occurred when people genuinely applied these principles. Businesses that were failing suddenly became successful. Job opportunities appeared when unemployment seemed permanent. Investment returns exceeded all reasonable expectations. Debts were paid off through unexpected income. But he also emphasized that these demonstrations didn't happen through magic or luck. They happened through the consistent application of spiritual law. When consciousness is aligned with divine truth about supply, experience automatically reflects that alignment. The most profound aspect of Fox's prosperity teaching is its integration with his larger understanding of God consciousness. Abundance consciousness is not a separate technique for making money. It's an expression of the fundamental recognition that you are one with infinite good in all its forms. When this recognition becomes genuine and consistent, prosperity becomes natural and effortless. You don't struggle to create abundance. You simply allow the abundance that is your divine nature to express itself freely. You don't worry about lack because you understand that lack is impossible when consciousness is aligned with infinite supply. This level of abundance consciousness represents true freedom, not just financial freedom, but freedom from the fear, worry, and struggle that characterize lack consciousness. It's the freedom to be generous, creative, and purposeful because your security comes from understanding your divine nature rather than from external accumulation. Fox's prosperity teaching ultimately points to a reality far grander than personal financial success, the recognition that the entire universe operates from abundance rather than scarcity. When you truly understand this, every area of your life reflects abundance. Health becomes abundant. Relationships become abundant. Creativity becomes abundant. Joy becomes abundant. This is the promise of abundance consciousness, not just more money, but more life in every form. Not just material prosperity, but the recognition that you are heir to infinite good in all its expressions. Not just financial freedom, but the freedom that comes from knowing your true nature as an expression of inexhaustible divine supply. Conclusion. As we reach the end of our exploration of Emmet Fox's revolutionary understanding of God consciousness and its power to rewire reality, we find ourselves not at a conclusion, but at a beginning. Everything we've discovered together, from the foundational principles of consciousness creating experience to the practical techniques for embodying divine truth in daily life, points toward one magnificent possibility. You have within you right now everything necessary to transform your life completely. Fox's great gift to humanity was not just his spiritual insight. Though that insight was profound, his great gift was making the mystical practical, the invisible visible, and the impossible possible. He took the highest spiritual truths and translated them into language that ordinary people could understand and methods that ordinary people could apply. He proved through thousands of demonstrations that spiritual law is as reliable as any natural law, and that anyone willing to understand and apply it consistently can achieve extraordinary results. But perhaps most importantly, Fox proved that you don't need to be special, perfect, or exceptionally gifted to experience the transformative power of God consciousness. You need only to be willing to question the limitations you've accepted as real, willing to experiment with spiritual principles despite skeptical voices around you, willing to persist through the inevitable periods when progress seems slow or invisible. The consciousness that can heal your body is the same consciousness that can heal your finances, your relationships, your career, and every other aspect of your life. The understanding that can solve one problem can solve any problem, because all problems exist at the level of consciousness, and consciousness can always be changed through spiritual realization and consistent spiritual practice. As you continue forward from here, remember that every great spiritual journey begins with a single step, the step of deciding that you're ready for something more than what limited human consciousness can provide. You've already taken that step by engaging with this material. Now the question is, what's your next step? Will you choose to apply these principles consistently, beginning with small challenges and building your spiritual strength gradually? Will you commit to daily spiritual practice that keeps your consciousness aligned with divine truth rather than human limitation? Will you begin seeing every person and every situation as opportunities to express and experience God consciousness? The power that created the universe lives within you as the very essence of what you are. This is not a beautiful metaphor. It's literal spiritual fact. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but as living reality, there is nothing in your experience that cannot be transformed. Nothing in your life that cannot reflect the harmony, abundance, health, love, and joy that are your divine birthright. Fox spent his entire career proving that spiritual transformation is not reserved for saints and mystics, but available to anyone willing to understand their true nature and live from that understanding. His students included business people and homemakers, young people and elderly people, educated people and simple people. What they all had in common was not special ability, but sincere willingness to discover what was possible when human consciousness aligned with divine consciousness. You are part of this great tradition now. Every time you choose to respond to a challenge with spiritual understanding rather than human limitation, you join the ranks of those who are gradually transforming human experience through individual realization. Every time you see divine nature in another person despite their human mistakes, you contribute to the healing of human consciousness itself. The world needs people who understand these principles and live from them consistently, not because the world is broken and needs to be fixed, but because the world is ready for the next stage of human evolution, the stage where spiritual understanding becomes as common as material understanding, where God consciousness becomes as natural as human consciousness once was. This evolution is not happening through force or revolution, but through recognition and realization. One person at a time discovers the truth of their divine nature. One family at a time learns to live from spiritual understanding. One community at a time demonstrates the practical power of applied spiritual principle. You are part of this magnificent unfolding. Your individual journey toward embodying God consciousness contributes to the collective journey of humanity toward recognizing its spiritual nature. Your personal demonstrations of spiritual law prove to everyone who witnesses them that transformation is possible. The journey begins now. With your next thought, your next choice, your next moment of recognizing the divine truth that is always present, always available, and always ready to manifest as your lived experience when consciousness aligns with spiritual reality. This is how God consciousness rewires reality, not through magic or miracle, but through the systematic application of spiritual understanding by ordinary people who discover their extraordinary divine nature and choose to live from it consistently, courageously, and joyfully. The power is yours. The principles are clear. The possibilities are unlimited. What happens next is up to you.